When a manager truly accomplishes their work, the result isn't mere obedience to commands, but a system that operates smoothly even in their absence. Perhaps few understood the loneliness of leadership as profoundly as Andrew Grove, an immigrant who rose from a laboratory to become the CEO of Intel, a corporation that shaped the entire global microprocessing industry. Yet, High Output Management isn't a book about success stories. It's the diary of a man who grappled with decisions between logic and compassion, speed and humanity, control and trust. In a world where every organization strives to do more, faster, and more efficiently, this book offers a different perspective. Productivity isn't about doing a lot. It's about understanding precisely what needs to be done. Grove didn't write as a detached professor of theory, but as someone who stood on a factory floor, witnessing production lines halt due to a minor flaw, and from that experience, extracted principles to manage thousands of people working in unison. The book is a rare fusion of an engineer's sharp logic and a deep human observer's empathy. Each chapter peels back a layer, exploring how an organization functions like a living organism, where information is its blood, trust its backbone, and leadership its heartbeat. In such a system, a manager's role isn't to wield a whip, but to cultivate an environment where every individual can become their best self. Grove didn't preach grand visions. He asked a simple, yet profound question: what happens when a leader takes time off and the system still functions perfectly? This seemingly straightforward question is the most accurate measure of managerial capability. Because if an organization crumbles in its leader's absence, that power isn't a strength, but a weakness disguised as control. Perhaps that's why High Output Management has remained a foundational text for technology leaders for nearly half a century. Grove's insights aren't exclusively for managers. They're for anyone coordinating the work of others, be it a small team, a project, or a family. And then, readers can't help but wonder, in a world demanding instant results, will anyone still possess the patience to build productivity through trust, feedback, and developing people, rather than just chasing numbers? That question, perhaps, is the very starting point of every leadership journey. The morning begins with the gentle clink of a spoon against a pot of boiling water. An egg is cooked for precisely 3 minutes amidst rising steam. Slices of bread wait in the toaster, and coffee drips, rich and dark. Everything seems simple, yet within that quiet rhythm lies the entire structure of the production world. Miss a beat, and the egg is overcooked, the bread cold, the coffee flavorless. The efficiency of the entire system collapses due to the smallest misstep. I once worked as a server while studying. It was in that small kitchen that I grasped what I later called the principle of production: how to achieve results on time, with the right quality, and at the lowest possible cost. A perfect breakfast is no different from a miniature production line. Every task, be it cooking, coding, or teaching, has a bottleneck, a point that dictates the speed and quality of the entire system. A good server immediately recognizes that boiling the egg is the most time-consuming part. The water must reach the exact temperature, and the timing must be precise to the second. The egg is the bottleneck. Everything else, the toast, the coffee, the plating, must revolve around this bottleneck. Because if you don't identify the bottleneck, you'll waste time on tasks that don't affect the final outcome. In production, that's the most common mistake: being busy with things that don't determine the output. From that single egg, I learned to look at larger systems. A company recruiting students is like cooking its own breakfast. Their biggest cost isn't phone calls, but flights, interview time, and all expenses related to inviting candidates to headquarters. That's the bottleneck. If they don't optimize it, the business will drain resources needlessly. Thus, we need an earlier filtering step: interviews via phone, email, or data, to only invite truly qualified individuals. It's like checking an egg's freshness before putting it in the pot, rather than waiting until it's cooked to discover it's rotten. When this mindset is applied to technology, we see it everywhere. A team of engineers writing software is also boiling their own eggs. They create each code segment, test it, assemble it, then test the entire system. If at any stage the egg boiling fails, the entire subsequent software will be flawed. Therefore, they need to test early and fix errors at the lowest possible stage to avoid discarding the whole batch of eggs when everything is nearly complete. The principle of the earlier you detect an error, the cheaper it is the crucial foundation of every production line, from industry to education, from service to technology. When you understand this, you begin to see the world differently. A legal system is also a production line, producing justice. It begins with a case, then moves to investigation, prosecution, trial, and sentencing. But if the conviction rate is low, all resources poured in beforehand become wasteful. The bottleneck here isn't the prison, but the process of proving guilt. Investing in the wrong place comes at a high cost to society. An empty prison isn't as frightening as an inefficient investigative system. I realized that every organization, whether a diner or a corporation, must answer the same question: where's my bottleneck? If you don't know, you'll be boiling eggs in cold water, toasting bread after the customers have left, and thinking you just need to be faster. In reality, the problem isn't speed, it's the order of actions. The wisdom of management isn't about doing more, but about doing the right thing at the right time. But real life is never as simple as a theoretical diagram. The kitchen always has limits. Only one toaster, one pot, one pair of hands. When many people wait, resources become a choke point. You can add machines, add people, or accept inventory buildup. Each choice is a trade-off between cost and time. A factory, an organization, or even a person operates within such trade-offs. There's no single absolute right answer, only the answer suitable for your current constraints. I remember the first time I witnessed an automated chip production line. It looked exactly like the automated egg boiling machine of my imagination. Everything operated smoothly, continuously, as if this world could be programmed for perfection. But then, just a minor deviation a few degrees off in temperature, a faulty component ruined thousands of chips. Precision is the religion of production, but oversight is its soul. Early testing, continuous experimentation, that's the only way to avoid disaster. And I understood that in every production flow, value isn't created once at the end. It's accumulated step by step, each stage adding a little new value. A cooked egg is more valuable than a raw one. A complete breakfast is worth more than individual items. A well-trained employee is more valuable than someone freshly hired. Value increases as the product moves closer to the customer, and the manager's responsibility is to protect that value at every step. If we detect a spoiled egg as soon as it's received, we only lose one egg. But if we don't detect it until the customer has eaten, we lose the entire breakfast, our reputation, and possibly the entire restaurant, just as in a business. The earlier an error is detected, the smaller the loss. That's the difference between someone skilled at organizing and someone who merely reacts. Looking around, I saw this principle hidden in everything, from chip manufacturing plants to schools, hospitals, or a small project within a company. Each place has its own breakfast. And if you observe carefully, you'll see that efficiency, order, and quality always begin with how we look at the smallest process. No one can manage the world if they don't know how to boil an egg perfectly for 3 minutes. And then, amidst the small sounds of morning boiling water, the toaster popping, coffee dripping, I realized that the work of management is, in essence, no different from cooking. You cannot force time. You can only understand and move with its rhythm. Management is the art of coordination, of anticipation, and of acting at the right moment. And if you grasp that, you're halfway to becoming someone who can make an entire system run as smoothly as a perfectly orchestrated piece of music. When breakfast is no longer just one egg or one cup of coffee, but hundreds, thousands of servings delivered daily, people cannot rely solely on skill as scale expands. Intuition is no longer enough. Order must be built on data. That's when the manager emerges. Imagine you're running a breakfast factory. You're no longer personally toasting bread or brewing coffee. Instead, you survey the entire landscape each morning when you open the office. The first thing you need to know isn't who showed up for work, but how many breakfasts need to be served today. That forecast is the foundation for every subsequent decision: ingredients, personnel, machinery. If the forecast is wrong, the entire system falters. Management doesn't begin with action, but with prediction. After that, you need to know how much you accomplished yesterday compared to your plan. The discrepancy between projection and reality is the system's language. It tells you that a gear is slipping somewhere. Next, you look at inventory: how much coffee, how much bread. Too much is waste, too little is a crisis. Balance is the soul of operations. You then look at the production line: is any machine broken? Is anyone sick? every small bottleneck can spread like a chain reaction. And finally, you check the element few dare to touch: quality. Is the breakfast delicious? Are customers returning? A customer's note can sometimes be more valuable than a multi-page production report. When you understand these numbers, you begin to see management as controlling hundreds of flows simultaneously. Each flow has its own rhythm. If you don't measure, you're blind within your own factory. But if you measure the wrong things, you'll ruin it. Because people tend to focus their attention where metrics are displayed and forget the rest. If you only measure quantity, people will chase speed and neglect quality. If you only measure cost, people will cut corners to the point of stifling creativity. Measurement isn't just about recording, it's about guiding behavior. Therefore, every metric needs a countermetric to maintain balance. Measure inventory, but also measure stockouts. Measure productivity, but also measure errors. The two sides of a metric are like two magnetic poles keeping the system in a stable orbit. I once tried to apply this at my company in the accounting department. Instead of just counting processed invoices, I added an error rate metric. For the cleaning team, beyond square meters cleaned, I asked department heads for qualitative feedback. The results were surprising. No one wanted to just chase numbers anymore because they knew they were being observed from two perspectives. The right metrics not only help control the system, but also foster a healthy competitive spirit. I often say an organization lives on data as its blood, and its heartbeat is its operational metrics. Each blinking metric is a signal from that colossal body, sent to the manager. Your job is to learn to listen. And to listen, you must know how to look into the system's black box, where all inputs, outputs, and internal processes are hidden. A factory, a team, or even a small department is a black box. You put eggs, bread, labor, and machinery into it, and the output is breakfast. But what truly happens inside? No one can directly see the system's internal organs, but we can open data windows to see the future. A simple example is the linear charta graph comparing current progress with end-of-period goals. If you plan to hire enough staff by June, but only reach half by April, you don't need to wait until June to know you've failed. The data has already spoken of the future. Another tool is the trend chart. It doesn't tell you what just happened, but gives you a sense of where things are heading. When you see the curve gradually flatten, it's not random. It's a sign of fatigue in the system, like a heart rate slowing before the body collapses. And there's a special type of map, which I really like, called the truck. It compares forecasts over several consecutive months to see how your own confidence is changing. When forecast numbers steadily slide downwards, it's a warning that you're losing accuracy in your perception, not just losing customers. Management isn't just about controlling others, it's also about learning to recognize where you're going wrong. The interesting thing is that these tools are not dry. They are like a sailor's compass and map. Without them, you'd be lost in an ocean of work. With them, you not only see the present, but can also anticipate storms before they hit. I've seen managers fail not because they lacked effort, but because they didn't know where they were on the map. They saw production increase and thought everything was fine, but didn't realize it only increased during the last 3 days of the month, meaning the entire system was sprinting in exhaustion. When you only look at aggregate results, you miss the system's heartbeat. The true power of measurement isn't in the numbers themselves, but in their ability to enable early action. It's like smelling smoke before the fire ignites. If you wait until it's burning, you're only left with extinguishing the remnants. Good managers never wait for a crisis to make decisions. They act on the smallest deviations. Data isn't the past, it's a light illuminating the future. And in that light, you learn a simple truth: control isn't suppression, it's understanding. When you understand how each part operates, you don't need to shout orders. The system will self-operate like a symphony guided by a synchronized heartbeat. Finally, looking back at my breakfast factory, I realized I wasn't just running a production line but a living organism. It had a heartbeat, breath, emotions, and even moments of fatigue. The manager's job isn't to turn people into machines, but to create a system where order is maintained, yet vitality isn't stifled. And when everything moves in rhythm, when breakfast comes out just as customers walk in, when the sounds of machines and people blend in perfect balance, you'll understand that chaos is merely the raw material of order. Managers don't eliminate chaos, they learn to make it dance. Once the breakfast factory operated stably, the manager began to notice something peculiar. The smoother things ran, the more mysterious they became. High performance resembled silence. You no longer saw movement, yet everything was still happening internally. This is precisely when the black box mentality emerges. Every organization has a shell that conceals what goes on inside. You only see inputs and outputs, raw materials entering, products leaving without truly seeing the flows between them. Yet it's within that hazy space that efficiency, waste, and even innovation reside. Smart managers don't try to rip open the black box. Instead, they cut small windows, just enough to observe signals and understand what's truly happening. One such window is the early indicator, which shows you trends before results even appear. When an indicator begins to deviate, you know the internal flow is changing course. That could be a delay in the production line, a slight increase in error rates, or simply an unusually prolonged silence from a team. All these small signals are the whispers of the system. Good managers don't wait for a scream to listen. Another way to see through time is the linear projection. This map compares ideal progress with reality. It's like a patient ruler. When we stray from that straight line, even by a few steps, the gap between expectation and reality multiplies over time. I once used this chart for recruitment. The goal was to have enough staff by June. If by April the actual number was only half, it meant we were living in an illusion. Without the chart, people are very good at lulling themselves with hope. But data isn't just for warning, it's also a means for people to understand themselves better. I remember once reviewing a multi-month forecast chart, what I called a stager. Each month, we redrew our revenue forecast, and I noticed something was wrong. The numbers were steadily decreasing. Though no one dared to say it aloud, we weren't losing customers, we were losing confidence. Upon realizing this, I understood that data speaks not only about the market, but also about the psychology of the very people generating it. Management is about reading the emotions hidden in numbers. Good data makes us humble because the more you measure, the more you realize how little you truly know. Every accurate number is a mirror, forcing you to confront what you don't want to see. And in that very moment, you begin to mature as an operator. I once believed that to do my job well, I had to control everything. Later, I understood that management isn't about control, but about creating conditions for the system to self-regulate when everyone understands the goals. When metrics measure what needs to be measured, and feedback occurs naturally, you no longer need to issue commands. The system balances itself, just as the human body adjusts its temperature when the environment changes. But this only happens when you understand the nature of time and work. Every decision you make doesn't stop in the present. It's like a stone thrown into water, creating ripples that spread far. A small mistake today can turn into a crisis 3 months later. Therefore, managers must learn to see through time, to perceive the future consequences of every current action in the breakfast factory. I saw this every day. When an employee forgot to check the water temperature in the pot, the consequences weren't immediate. But 3 hours later, when hundreds of eggs were overcooked, the damage became clear. Good managers don't wait for results to react. They act at the moment an error is still just a possibility. I often told my colleagues that time is the most precious raw material in production. Money can be regained, people can be retrained, but lost time is permanent. Therefore, the entire art of measurement, forecasting, and feedback is, in essence, humanity's effort to negotiate with time, to pull it a little closer, understand it a little earlier, and act before it slips away. In that journey, I learned that metrics are never perfect. Data always carries inaccuracies, but silence is more dangerous than error. A system without measurement is a body without sensation. It only knows pain when it's too late. So, I choose to live with the numbers, even though they sometimes make me uncomfortable. They are the most honest voice of reality. Looking back at my entire breakfast factory, I realized that what I built wasn't just a production line, but a way of thinking. This world at any scale is made up of interlocking black boxes. People within an organization, the organization within a market, the market within time. And the manager's job is to learn to see through each layer, not to control, but to understand. One day, I stood watching coffee steam rise in the factory and thought, perhaps our job isn't to avoid chaos, but to understand its rhythm. Within that chaos, there is hidden order. Within that order, there is the vitality of change. If you listen carefully, you'll realize that data, metrics, and production lines don't just speak about work. They tell the story of humanity itself. constantly striving to reorder the world to survive in an uncertain universe. When you understand that, you no longer fear small deviations or panic in the face of crises. You see the pulse of the entire system and know when to act and when to wait. You no longer have to chase results because results are the natural consequence of a system that is understood and cared for properly. From a 3-minute boiled egg, I learned to read the language of the world, where everything operates at its own rhythm, where precision isn't rigidity but a harmony between people and the management system. Ultimately, it's not a profession of control, but the art of listening to the invisible movements of time, people, and order. When I asked mid-level managers about their output, they would often reply with lists of ideas, plans, reports, directives, training sessions, or negotiations. This sounds logical, but it's all wrong. These are merely activities, not results. A manager's true output is the output of their subordinates and of the units within their sphere of influence. If your team performs better because of you, that is an achievement. If they operate the same whether you're there or not, then all your efforts are meaningless motion. When observing a manager's workday, one sees a series of disconnected actions: meetings, reading reports, answering emails, offering opinions, handling crises. Everyone seems busy, yet productivity varies strangely. Some do little but have a profound impact. Others do a lot with vague results. The difference lies in the leverage of each action. I define managerial leverage as the ratio between the effort expended and the result generated within the system. If you spend an hour solving an issue that only concerns one person, the leverage is low. If you use that same hour to shape how 100 people work, the leverage is high. Therefore, a manager's job isn't to do more, but to choose the right things to do at the right time to create a ripple effect. Imagine a financial manager preparing a planning process for the company. She spends time clearly defining milestones, templates, responsibilities, and communication methods. She will save hundreds of other employees thousands of hours of chaos later on. Her 1 hour of preparation is equivalent to hundreds of hours of efficiency for the organization. That is true leverage. Conversely, another manager spends an entire afternoon correcting every minor error in an employee's report. They think they're being meticulous, but they're actually cutting off their own leverage. High leverage occurs when your actions affect many people over a long period or unlock the potential of others. You can increase leverage in 3 ways. First, work faster to save time for more important tasks. Second, increase the value of each action by choosing long-lasting impact. Third, change the ratio of work-reduced time spent on small tasks, dedicate time to tasks that create large impact. A good training session can create value for years. A well-timed decision can change the company's entire direction. But to do that, you must realize that your time is your scarcest resource. Your hour is not like someone else's hour. It has the potential to amplify efficiency for the entire system. Many people think doing it themselves is faster than teaching others. They fear delegation, fear losing control. But when you do it for them, you only produce your own results. When you teach, you multiply capability. Teaching others to do work correctly is the highest leverage action in management. It's like adding more gears to a system. You don't need to turn harder, just turn in the right place. However, not all leverage yields positive results. An action can amplify efficiency, but it can also amplify mistakes. A careless word in a meeting can demoralize dozens of people. A hasty decision can send an entire project in the wrong direction for months. Therefore, managers must be alert to know when to intervene and when to step back. Sometimes, not acting at all is the best way to create leverage because you're allowing the system to learn to self-operate. There's a principle I always remember. Whenever you engage in a task, ask, what is the leverage of this activity? If the answer isn't clear, don't do it. That's the difference between a good manager and a busy one. Busy people like the feeling of control, while good managers seek long-term influence. A manager can sit quietly in their office, write a clear process guide, and impact thousands of people throughout the year. Another might run around the hallways all day, fixing every small error that no one remembers him doing. Speed doesn't create value if it lacks direction. The true power of leverage lies in its ability to multiply understanding and human motivation. When you help someone understand the meaning of their work, when you make them believe their effort is important, you're creating self-sustaining energy. That is the invisible yet most powerful form of leverage. the leverage of belief and purpose. A manager isn't someone who gives orders, but someone who creates the context for others to unleash their full potential. If every action you take makes others work better, you have succeeded. When you create a system that can operate without your supervision, you've reached the highest level of leverage. And then you realize your job is no longer to do more, but to create the conditions for the system to reproduce performance itself. At that point, you are no longer a link in the chain, you are the designer of its operational rhythm. Leverage is not magic. It is mindfulness in every action, the ability to see beyond the surface of the work. A manager can do less, say less, but achieve more, because they understand that true value doesn't lie in motion, but in radiating impact. In the manager's world, information is the bloodstream. It nourishes, connects, and sustains the life of the entire organization. But information doesn't flow on its own. It needs conduits, and those conduits are meetings. Many people complain about too many meetings, failing to realize that meetings are the core work of management, the place where collective thought, emotion, and action converge to create shared momentum. Meetings are the communication medium of management, where leaders not only convey information, but also shape how the team understands and responds to the world. Each type of meeting is like a different instrument in the same orchestra. Each instrument has its own rhythm, its own role, but all must work towards a single symphony, collective performance. The first and most important type of meeting is the one-on-one. This is a space for the leader to understand the individual, for the employee to be heard and understood. In a one-on-one, a manager isn't an auditor but a companion. We discuss progress, challenges, and nascent ideas. The value of such a conversation isn't just in the information exchanged, but in the two-way learning. The employee receives guidance, and the manager gains insight into their own leadership style. Next is the operational team meeting, where the gears of the system are realigned to mesh perfectly. Here, the goal isn't hasty decision-making, but synchronizing understanding, preventing individuals from following their own separate paths. Each member brings their piece of the puzzle: revenue, production, HR, product. And when these pieces are assembled, the leader sees the larger picture. A strong organization is one where everyone understands the same reality, even if they view it from different positions. Finally, there's the action-oriented meeting, where decisions are formalized and commitments are made. Many believe decision-making is an individual act, but in reality, a decision only holds value when it's absorbed by the entire system. A decision that doesn't translate into action remains just an idea on paper. Therefore, leaders not only need to be right, but also need to ensure everyone sees that truth and believes in it. When information doesn't flow, the system gets clogged. When meetings become ritualistic, where people sit merely to fulfill an obligation, the organization begins to rot from within. A meeting that doesn't produce action is dead time. Thus, every meeting must be designed as a living structure with a purpose, a flow, and an outcome that drives concrete movement. Good leaders don't let meetings drift aimlessly. They know when to delve deeper and when to stop. They listen not just to content, but also to the silences. They identify unspoken conflicts and bring them to light before they escalate into open clashes. A leader isn't the one who talks the most in a meeting, but the one who prompts others to voice what's most important. However, meetings cannot exist separately from the decision-making process. Decision-making is the highest act of managerial intelligence, where information, intuition, and responsibility converge. There's no single formula, but there's a structure to avoid arbitrariness. First, correctly identify the problem. This is far harder than finding a solution. A correct decision on the wrong problem is still a failure. Then, gather data, but don't become paralyzed by it. You only need it to be good enough to act. A quick decision with 70% good information is better than a late decision with perfect information. Next, present options and debate them openly. A true debate is where truth is forged through friction. Then comes selection, not choosing what everyone likes, but choosing what is most likely to be right. And finally, commitment. Not everyone has to agree, but all must execute as if it were their own decision. Decision-making is the journey of transforming conflict into commitment. An organization can tolerate disagreement, but cannot tolerate hesitation. After a decision is made, the leader must protect it like a sapling against the wind. It needs time to prove its worth, and during that time, your belief is the nourishment for the entire system. However, managers don't always need to intervene strongly. There are times when the best thing you can do is subtle influence rather than imposition. A well-timed question, a subtle suggestion, can lead others to find the answer themselves. And when they discover it through their own experience, that decision is more resilient than any command. Meetings, decision-making, commitment all are a chain reaction of information and trust. The manager guides that flow not by force, but by a subtle, responsive sense of the system. They create an environment where collective intelligence crystallizes, where every voice becomes living data, where action is born from understanding, not fear. And when an organization reaches that point when meetings are no longer obligations, but places where people gather to understand better, when decisions are no longer commands, but agreements of intellect, then you will see that information no longer needs to be forced. It flows naturally. The system becomes transparent, and human energy begins to flow together. That is the rare moment when the manager realizes they no longer have to control. They just need to keep the rhythm of information flowing seamlessly. Because when information moves correctly, the organization will find its own path. No company fails simply due to a lack of vision. They fail because they lack a sufficiently flexible plan to turn that vision into reality. Every manager lives between two worlds, the present where chaos unfolds hourly and the future where results will be judged. The sole bridge between these two worlds is the plan, but a plan is not a static document. A plan is a living system where every goal, task, and person breathes in unison. When I started planning a project, I didn't ask, "What will we do?" but "Why do we need to do this and where will it lead?" The first answer reveals meaning, while the second unlocks action. Therefore, a good plan always begins with a mission, then transforms into objectives, followed by specific tasks, and finally, measurable metrics. An organization without a clear mission is like a ship without a compass. But an organization with only a mission, lacking a system of tasks and measurements, is like a map without coordinates. Each objective needs to be tied to specific measurements so that people can track progress before the final result appears. No one knows when a fire will break out, but everyone must be ready. Planning isn't about divination but structured preparation for the unpredictable. You cannot know exactly what will happen, but you can ensure you react quickly, in the right direction, and without panic. A good plan combines two time rhythms, short-term and long-term. Short-term helps the organization take concrete daily actions. Long-term gives the organization a reason to keep acting. If there's only a long-term plan, people will lose patience. If there's only a short-term plan, the organization will drift with fluctuations. The strength of management lies in its ability to connect these two rhythms with a series of realistic yet meaningful objectives. For a plan to come alive, it needs a pulse, a rhythm of measurement. I call these leading indicators early signs that show the future is changing direction. If you only look at sales figures, you're observing the past. But if you track the number of potential customers, you're looking towards the future. Good managers don't wait for results, they measure trends. I once applied this when leading a team of engineers. Instead of just measuring software bugs after product launch, we tracked the number of failed tests per week. Those seemingly dry numbers told me what the end-of-month report never could. The team was fatigued, processes were bottlenecked, and without early intervention, the project would be delayed by at least a month. Data isn't the goal, it's the voice of the future if we know how to listen. A strong plan doesn't avoid deviations, it anticipates them. When I plan, I always draw a linear projection, a chart that shows where we should be at each point in time. Then I compare actual progress with that ideal line. Whenever the gap between the two lines widens, I don't panic. I ask, why is this happening? It's in that question that the plan becomes a learning tool, not a verdict. But a plan is only meaningful if people execute it. Without commitment, a plan is just paper. A plan written by a manager but not owned by the team will die at the first obstacle. Therefore, I always involve those directly executing the work in the planning process. When they contribute ideas, they understand it. When they understand it, they believe in it. And when they believe, they act. Commitment cannot be commanded. It's nurtured through participation. We must plan as if we know the future, but act as if we are ready to embrace the unexpected. Flexibility isn't a lack of discipline. It's a higher form of discipline, the discipline of those unafraid of change. A plan, therefore, isn't a fixed map but a continuously updating navigation system. It helps the organization know where it is, which direction it's drifting, and how to adjust to avoid losing its mission in a complex world. Seeing far ahead is not as important as seeing clearly at each step. And then, when all objectives are reconnected, when teams understand why they are doing what they are doing, you will see something miraculous. The plan is no longer a command, but the natural flow of organizational energy. Managers no longer have to push anyone because everyone understands where they are going. I once thought the job of management was forecasting, trying to know the future. Now I understand that management isn't about knowing the future, but about being better prepared than anyone else. A plan doesn't help us control everything, but it helps us be ready for anything. At that point, you will feel you are no longer racing against time, but moving with it. Every action today not only solves immediate problems, but shapes the results of tomorrow. Good managers always know that every current decision is an investment in the future. Leverage helps actions spread. Meetings help collective intelligence crystallize, and plans help all efforts move towards a shared future. When these three elements harmonize, the organization doesn't just operate. It becomes a living organism that learns, adapts, and develops according to its own rhythm. When a system operates well, people often assume that simply scaling it up is enough. But when the small breakfast factory began serving thousands instead of dozens, I realized a bitter truth. What works perfectly on a small scale becomes fragile when expanded. Every link, every intermediate step, multiplies the potential for disorder on a larger scale. Deviation isn't just a technical error, it's a chain reaction. At this point, the leader's role is no longer to oversee every boiled egg or slice of bread. They become the architect of a complex system where dozens of factories operate in unison, and thousands of people depend on a network of data, processes, and trust. From here, leadership is no longer about operating, but about designing the operational system itself. I remember the time we opened the second factory. Everything was like rebuilding the first breakfast, with the same recipes, same equipment, same people. But the results were different. A small discrepancy in delivery time threw the entire line into disarray. Bread arrived before eggs, coffee grew cold as customers sat down. When the system doubled, problems doubled, and coordination tripled. Overall efficiency no longer depended on individual units, but on their ability to synchronize. For a large system to function, we must learn to standardize processes. We can no longer rely on personal experience. I established mandatory metrics: order processing time, inventory levels, material quotas. When factories shared a common data language, information began to flow seamlessly. Standardization doesn't make people more robotic, it helps them coordinate in a complex world. Parallel to standardization is output synchronization. A perfectly functioning factory is still useless if its product arrives at the wrong time for the next chain. Every unit in the system needs to understand that their work doesn't end at the workshop's boundary, but continues to live within the value chain of the entire network. When you don't see the recipient of your product, you must understand your responsibility even more profoundly. The biggest challenge isn't technical but human. As scale expands, teams begin to think of themselves as independent entities. They protect their own interests, optimize their own metrics, and forget the common goal. One factory might boast record productivity, while the adjacent factory has to shut down because raw materials arrived too early or too late. Local efficiency does not equate to system efficiency. I understood that without creating a system-wide identity, we would soon collapse under our own weight. Therefore, I began building a unified training system where everyone was coached not only on skills, but also on mindset. The manager of each factory was taught to view the organization as a continuous flow, not an isolated island. When perceptions change, the structure naturally follows. Another important aspect was centralized measurement. When each unit had its own reports, the truth was fragmented. I established a single dashboard for the entire network: productivity, cost, quality, response speed. This allowed us to see the heartbeat of the entire system, not just the pulse of individual parts. Data became a common language, and a common language created shared understanding. But data synchronization alone wasn't enough. We needed to standardize behavior. Everyone in the system had to understand that their decisions affected not just their immediate work, but also people they didn't even know. That's when culture emerged, something that cannot be written down in a manual, but permeates every action. Culture is the unspoken rule that helps a massive network move harmoniously without anyone having to shout orders. For that to happen, I had to change myself. Previously, I focused on processes. Now I learned to look at organizational architecture. If the system ran smoothly, I stepped back. If there was a bottleneck, I didn't rush to fix it. Instead, I examined what structural element caused that bottleneck to exist. Senior leaders don't fix errors, they fix the structures that produce errors. Each time a new factory opened, I no longer felt pride in expansion, but a sense of vigilance. Each new point was a new connection node, a place where information could be transmitted or distorted. Therefore, I created a cross-auditing mechanism between units quarterly. One factory had to cross-evaluate another factory's processes. They learned from each other, but also monitored each other. Trust is built not from goodwill, but from transparency and mutual accountability. Looking at the entire system from above, I realized a paradox. The less I touched the details, the further I had to see. The leader no longer lived in the rhythm of individual production lines, but in the overall rhythm of the entire network. Every decision didn't just affect one process, but could create a cascading reaction throughout. Wisdom, at this point, wasn't about giving quick orders, but about seeing the connections between seemingly unrelated movements. When the breakfast factory became a nationwide network, I understood that an organizational system is no different from a living body. It grows, regenerates, gets sick, and heals itself. The leader's job is to keep that flow continuous, not to control, but to maintain the rhythm. When all parts beat in unison, the organization needs no one to supervise. It operates on its own internal vitality. And that was the moment I realized I was no longer running a factory. I was running an ecosystem of factories, where each element was both autonomous and interdependent, where performance was no longer measured by the energy of one person, but by the harmony of the entire system. Once the system had expanded and factories began operating independently, a new problem emerged. Efficiency within individual units no longer guaranteed the efficiency of the entire organization. The trap of growth is fragmentation. Deeply specialized departments increasingly isolated themselves within their own skill boundaries, while product teams got caught in a race for short-term results. One side became detached, the other superficial. Both worked hard, but they weren't looking in the same direction. I realized that an organizational structure cannot stand on just one leg. A functional structure provides specialized depth, helping individuals become true experts, but it also disconnects them from market reality. Conversely, a product or project-based structure makes the organization dynamic and closer to customers, but it can dilute core skills. Both are correct, but only half correct. From this, an intermediary model, a hybrid organization, emerged where the two structures intersect. In this model, each person lives in a functional home, where they are trained, promoted, and learn, while also belonging to a project team where they apply their skills to a specific product. A person might report to two different levels of leadership simultaneously. And it is precisely this, if not properly understood, that sows the seeds of conflict. I once witnessed seemingly meaningless arguments between two sides, the head of the technical department and the project manager. One demanded more time to optimize code, while the other pushed for a timely product launch. Both had valid points, but their logic resided in two different organizational spaces within the hybrid structure. Conflict is not a problem, it's a natural breath of life. Trying to eliminate conflict is trying to eliminate the creative energy of the system. What's needed isn't to extinguish clashes, but to create a structure where conflict becomes balance. Therefore, I established the principle of dual reporting lines. Employees reported to their functional manager, who ensured specialized competence was maintained, and also to their project manager, who ensured output results were achieved. These two lines weren't competitive but complementary, like two gears keeping a production line stable, preventing it from slipping off track. However, for this model to work, the prerequisites are trust and clarity. If boundaries of authority aren't defined, the organization will descend into chaos. The functional manager must understand that their role isn't to command the project, but to nurture the people within the project. And the project manager must know that their power comes from collective results, not from possessing resources. When everyone wants control, the system gets choked. When everyone understands their role, the system self-adjusts. I began implementing a simple rule. When an employee receives two conflicting requests, the two managers involved must meet. No one is allowed to push the conflict downwards. Employees are not where the force is absorbed, they are where the force is transmitted. And each time two managers sat down together, the organization learned to collaborate on a deeper level. A system truly matures only when it learns to resolve tension without breaking its structure. This change forced me to accept a difficult truth. Conflict is a natural state of life. In biology, cells grow through a balance of cohesive and repulsive forces. The same principle repeats in organizations. We need enough stability to maintain identity, but also enough tension to grow. Without impulse, there will be no movement. From a holistic view, the hybrid model resembles a massive neural network. Specialized cells connect across project nerves. Each intersection is where knowledge meets practice, where theory transforms into product. The modern organization is no longer a pyramid, but a living network where information travels faster than commands. In such a network, managers cannot rely on power. They must rely on credibility, knowledge, and the ability to coordinate. When people have two leaders, they will naturally compare, observe, and self-adjust. You can no longer hide behind a title. Power is now measured by your ability to inspire others to voluntarily cooperate. But this system also demands something more subtle than skill: transparency. Everyone needs to know what others are doing and why. If information is hidden, the network will be noisy. I required teams to publicly share their progress and problems in short cycles. Everyone looked at the same data dashboard. No one could blame the darkness when light was evenly spread. Power automatically became balanced. When an organization becomes hybrid, managers can no longer stand at the center giving orders but must learn to become connectors. They don't control the flow, they coordinate the rhythm. A reminder, a meeting, accurate data at the right time. These small things become the nervous system of the entire organization. Leadership is no longer about making the fastest decisions, but about keeping information flowing most smoothly. When this model stabilized, I saw something strange happen. The organization began to rebalance itself. When one side leaned too heavily towards efficiency, the other would pull back with quality. When a project ran too fast, the technical department would remind them of standards. The system learned to self-regulate, like the body regulating its heartbeat. And when that happened, I understood that I had moved beyond the role of an operator to become the designer of the organization's nervous system. In a hybrid model, stability doesn't come from commands, but from a structure that allows conflict to exist without dissolution. When people understand that they don't need to agree to cooperate, when they know how to debate without needing to win, the organization will grow. It no longer fears differences, but knows how to use differences as fuel for evolution. Then we will see what all leaders aspire to. The organization no longer needs constant supervision, but self-operates with distributed intelligence. It's not one person leading, but the entire system guiding itself. And in that operational rhythm, power becomes light as a breath, yet its effectiveness is as deep as an underground stream. When an organization has grown into a multi-layered network, the biggest problem is no longer productivity, but control. How do all units maintain a common direction without continuous supervision? How can order be maintained without stifling autonomy? I realized that control in large organizations is no longer about command, but about the art of distance. In the early years, I believed a good manager was someone who always knew what was happening. I wanted to check every report, approve every plan, attend every meeting. But the tighter I held on, the weaker the system became. I realized that absolute control only creates an illusion of safety. When the leader is always there, people stop thinking independently. When the leader leaves, everything stops moving. I call this principle variable inspection, meaning you don't need to supervise everything, only things that are high risk or changing rapidly. It's like a doctor not examining the entire body every day, but focusing on areas showing abnormal signs. Effective control isn't comprehensive control, but knowing where to touch. To do that, I needed to understand the maturity level of each individual and team. I used the concept of task-relevant maturity, TRM. A person with low TRM needs detailed instructions. A person with high TRM only needs general direction. You cannot use the same leadership style for everyone. Leadership is the art of adjusting the level of control according to maturity. I divided control into 3 tiers. The first tier is detailed direction, for newcomers who lack experience and are easily lost. Here, the manager acts as a guiding teacher, explicitly stating what to do, when, and how. There's nothing wrong with tight control in the initial phase, as it helps them avoid fundamental mistakes, but if it's prolonged too much, it becomes a burden. The second tier is guidance and feedback. As employees begin to understand the work, they no longer need commands but dialogue. The manager shifts from commander to coach. They ask questions, listen, and help others find solutions themselves. At this level, the goal isn't to do the work for them but to help them do it correctly. The final tier is delegation and trust. With high TRM, the manager only needs to set goals, resources, and boundaries. They don't interfere with how the work is done, only measure the results. Control through trust is the highest level of management because it's based on competence and self-initiative, not fear. But trust cannot be given through words alone. It must be built with data and transparency. I established an automated measurement system where every team could track their progress in real time. Everyone saw their work results as if looking in a mirror. No one needed reminding. When data became the illuminating light, supervision became effortless, and responsibility became natural. One of my favorite tools is the exception report. Instead of reading hundreds of pages of data, I only looked at what exceeded thresholds, the anomalies. Everything else, the system was left to manage itself. This prevented me from getting bogged down in minutiae while still maintaining a sense of the organization's pulse. Good leaders don't need to know everything, only what's concerning and what isn't. However, the most subtle aspect of control isn't in the tools but in the frequency of intervention. Too little checking, the system drifts. Too much checking, the system loses its rhythm. Each time I intervened, I had to ask myself, does this help them learn or does it make them dependent? If the answer leaned towards the latter, I stopped. Timely intervention is the measure of maturity in management. In large systems, you cannot rely solely on commands because commands are slower than reality. Decisions must be decentralized. This means the person closest to the problem has the authority to act fastest. But for that to be safe, they need accurate information and clear boundaries. Decentralization without data is chaos. Data without trust is paralysis. Only when these two go hand in hand does the system truly come alive. When I looked back at the entire network, I saw a clear change. Before every report passed through my hands, every decision awaited my signature. Now, I only appeared when there was a deviation beyond the threshold, when there was a strange signal in the system. I no longer controlled every beat but merely adjusted the tempo. Management was no longer about controlling people, but about maintaining the system's rhythm. The interesting thing is that when I controlled less, efficiency increased. People work better when they feel trusted. And that very trust makes them fear making mistakes not because of punishment, but because they don't want to betray that trust. Trust, when placed correctly, is more powerful than any command. I also learned another thing in large organizations. Sometimes the best way to control is through culture. When everyone shares a common value system, the right decisions are made without needing approval. Culture becomes a natural filter that helps the organization act cohesively, even without direct orders. When trust permeates into culture, the organization becomes self-governing yet cohesive. Now, looking back at the journey from a small breakfast factory to a giant network, I understand the core truth. An organization truly matures when it can self-operate on trust, self-adjust with data, and self-direct with culture. I no longer try to control everything because I know that if the system has to depend on me, it means I have failed. The greatest success of a leader is when they can leave, and everything continues to move forward. That is the highest level of control by not needing to control. And in that moment, I realized I was no longer running an organization. I was witnessing a living organism where people, data, and trust harmonized in a single pulse of collective intelligence where power dissolves. All that remains is efficiency, reliability, and the entire system's ability to self-adapt. When you look at a functioning company, you might see numbers, reports, and plans neatly arranged on paper. But behind all of that is, in fact, a game with rules, tactics, rhythm, and players. An organization, in essence, is like a football team, where each person holds a position and every action affects the collective outcome. And the manager is the coach standing on the sidelines, seeing the entire movement that the players on the field cannot. In a football team, good individual players don't guarantee victory. A team with brilliant individuals can still lose to a more ordinary opponent simply due to a lack of coordination, rhythm, and immediate responsiveness. The same is true for an organization. An outstanding individual can propel a team forward for a short time, but if the system doesn't know how to adapt, that strength will disintegrate amidst conflict and stagnation. No winning team relies solely on individual talent. Victory comes from how they move together. The manager, like a coach, doesn't directly participate in the game, but every pass, every tactic, every final result reflects their thinking and vision. Leaders don't score goals, but they create the conditions for goals to happen. Their job isn't to run the fastest, but to see further than everyone else. In a football team, the coach doesn't wait until the end of the match to give feedback. They shout instructions mid-play, make substitutions instantly, and change tactics in a split second. The same holds true in management. Feedback must be fast, clear, and timely. A suggestion 3 weeks later is no longer feedback. It's a judgment. Information only has value when it's alive, when it's close enough for the listener to feel the heat of the present moment. I once witnessed a team fail not due to lack of ability, but due to lack of feedback. Each person worked in their own silence. No one knew when others were deviating until the results arrived, and everyone was surprised. The truth is, silence is the enemy of performance in a team. Silence means losing rhythm. A strong organization needs to maintain rhythm, just as a football team coordinates in fast-paced movement. That rhythm doesn't come from commands, but from shared understanding. A player doesn't need to be told when to make a run because he understands his teammates. The same applies to an organization. When people understand each other deeply enough, they will act naturally as if a collective intelligence is guiding them. That is the moment an organization transcends human limitations and becomes a living system with a soul. To achieve this, the manager's role shifts from commander to coach. A coach doesn't yell at players to score, but helps them understand how to move to create opportunities themselves. Similarly, a leader doesn't command people to be more efficient, but points out what's hindering efficiency and teaches them how to overcome it. Coaching isn't about coercion, it's about paving the way. An organization is also like a football team in that it must know when to make substitutions. No one, no matter how good, can stay on the field forever. When energy wanes or tactics change, the coach must bravely make changes. Likewise, managers must dare to adjust personnel, however difficult that may be. Fairness isn't about treating everyone the same, but about putting each person in the right position where they can contribute the most. One of the most subtle aspects of coaching is recognizing each person's rhythm. Some need encouragement, some need challenges, some need more responsibility to grow, some need their workload reduced to recover. The manager must feel the rhythm of each individual, just as a conductor feels the breath of each musician. Only then can the team truly play a symphony of performance. But what makes the difference between winning and losing teams is not skill, but spirit. A team can lose, but if they still believe in each other, they will come back stronger. An organization is the same. Trust is something that cannot be measured by data, but determines everything. When people believe they are playing a meaningful game together, they will fight beyond their own limits. Throughout my management journey, I realized something seemingly simple yet profoundly deep. Everyone wants to win. No one comes to a company to lose. But not everyone understands what winning truly means. A leader's job is to define victory for their team, not with slogans, but with concrete actions, by measuring, by organizing so that each individual feels their contribution is meaningful. An organization, ultimately, is a game everyone is learning to play together. Rules can change, the field can expand, but the principle remains the same. Winning isn't about speed, but about coordination, not about strength, but about rhythm, not about individuals, but about the team. When we understand this, we no longer see employees as machines that must operate correctly, but as players engaged with us in a real game. And then, leadership is no longer a command, but a form of art, the art of helping others play better than they even imagined. A successful organization isn't just because it has the right strategy, but because it has people who listen to each other, give timely feedback, and act for a common goal. Like great football teams, they don't need to shout to understand each other. They just need a glance, a shared breath, a belief that the other person is also aiming for the goal. A good leader never stands outside the game. They stand where they can see the whole match. They don't carry the ball, but they keep the game from falling into chaos. They don't score goals, but because of them, everyone knows why they are running. No two people are the same, and therefore, no two leadership styles can be applied identically to two different people. Just as in a football team, some need to be cheered loudly to maintain their spirit, while others only need a nod to continue. In an organization, each individual possesses a unique level of maturity. And the crucial thing isn't where they are, but that the manager must adapt their style to the readiness of each person for each specific task. I call this task-relevant maturity, TRM. It's not a general human maturity, but the level of readiness for a particular job. Someone might be very confident in sales but feel awkward leading a team. A brilliant engineer might excel at coding but lose direction when planning a project. Maturity is not a fixed quality but a state that changes with each role. For individuals with low TRM, the leader's role is meticulous guidance, clearly stating what to do, how to do it, and why. They need structure, frameworks, and a sense of security. If left unsupervised at this stage, the organization will lose the opportunity to develop a strong individual later on, but if kept indefinitely under direct command, they will never mature. Control is necessary to guide, but if prolonged, it will kill self-confidence. As TRM increases, the leader needs to shift their approach. At this point, the job is no longer to command, but to suggest and facilitate. The manager must learn to step back, observe, and ask questions instead of providing answers. Each well-placed question holds more power than a list of instructions. When a person begins to find answers themselves, that is a sign they have begun to mature at the highest level. When TRM has reached a stable level, the leader's role is delegation. But delegation isn't letting go, it's a form of conditional trust. The leader must still observe, still verify, but not interfere. They are no longer the one steering, but the one watching the wind direction. Trust is not abandoning power, but choosing to wield it more subtly. I once made the mistake of treating everyone the same because I thought fairness meant uniformity. But then I understood that true fairness is giving each person exactly what they need to develop. Newcomers need guidance, talented individuals need space, those who are tired need to be heard, and those who are eager need challenges. And the leader's job is to read that silent language. Furthermore, understanding people doesn't stop at observation, it also involves the courage to evaluate. Evaluation is one of the bravest acts of a manager. It demands absolute honesty, but also compassion. If you point out flaws without offering a path to correction, that's punishment. If you only say what's easy to hear, that's betrayal. A proper evaluation isn't a judgment, it's a dialogue. It doesn't just answer the question, what have you done? But also, who can you become? A principle I always adhere to is that evaluation must be specific, not emotional. Don't say, you're not dynamic enough. Instead, say, in yesterday's meeting, when your idea was rejected, you remained silent instead of offering a counterargument. When people see specific behaviors, they have an opportunity to change. Vague feedback only creates defensiveness. Clear feedback creates action. But there are two tasks that everyone fears, yet leaders must still perform: promotion and dismissal. Promotion sounds like joy, but it's a double-edged sword. Someone might shine in their current role, but fail miserably in a higher position simply because the tasks exceed their level of maturity. In many cases, it's the manager's kindness in promoting someone too early that causes that employee to lose confidence and reputation. Promotion at the wrong time is cruelty wrapped in kindness. As for dismissal, that's not an exercise of power but a display of responsibility. No one wants to do it, but an organization cannot survive if people remain in it purely out of sentiment. Keeping an unsuitable person just to avoid guilt is a betrayal of the entire team. If you've decided to fire someone, it means you should have done it 3 months ago, because the longer you wait, the greater the harm. Delaying the truth is the cruelest form. Yet, amidst these difficult decisions, what bothered me most wasn't anyone's mistakes, but my failure to help them in time. Because dismissal is merely the final period at the end of a long chain of ignored feedback. If the leader had provided timely feedback and appropriate training, many tragedies might have been averted. Someone leaving in silence is a sign of system failure, not just individual failure. As I understood people more deeply, I realized that management isn't about control but about companionship. Each person has their own pace of growth. You cannot force flowers to bloom early, but you also cannot let them wither in the shade. The art of leadership lies in sensing the right moment, when to push, when to pull back, when to trust, and when to conclude. Because ultimately, the goal of leadership isn't to create obedient followers, but to create confident individuals who do the right thing even when no one is watching. And to do that, we must understand people not only with reason, but with the intuition of an experienced person who knows fear, knows love, and knows the responsibility for the growth of others. Once people are understood, the leader must answer a harder question: what truly motivates them to exert effort? It's not commands, not fear, but the feeling of being recognized, receiving feedback, and growing. Grove argued that in any organization, money isn't just a means of survival, it's the language of value. How an organization pays speaks volumes about how it perceives people's contributions. Salary is a form of feedback. Someone earning more than another isn't simply because they've been there longer, but because the organization is telling them, "We believe your contributions have a greater impact." If compensation doesn't accurately reflect true value, that message becomes distorted. People lose trust, motivation wanes, and the organization begins to disintegrate from within. An unfair reward and punishment system is a slow grinding knife accelerating decline. It doesn't make noise, but bit by bit it erodes morale. Fairness isn't about everyone receiving a reward, but about each person feeling their results are seen. When a talented employee sees someone doing less receive the same share, the organization loses that talent not for money, but for self-respect. At the lowest level, money is a survival need. But once basic needs are met, money becomes a symbol of recognition. People don't just want to live, they want to know their efforts are meaningful. Therefore, salary and bonuses cannot be separated from morale. Grove said, compensation is feedback. Every number on a payslip is a message. What level of contribution are you making? And if that message is skewed, morale will suffer. However, monetary feedback is only part of the equation. The deeper, more sustainable part is coaching. Good leaders don't just tell others where they stand, they help them go further. Grove asserted, training is the boss's job. Training isn't the HR department's task, it's the responsibility of every leader. No one understands the work better than the person directly managing it, and no one can coach better than themselves. But coaching here isn't a classroom. It happens in daily actions, in how questions are asked, how mistakes are corrected, how timely feedback is given. A meeting can be a lesson, a short conversation can open a turning point for growth. Coaching doesn't need formality, it just needs attentiveness. Many managers believe they are too busy to train. They don't realize that training is the longest-term time saver. For every hour they spend coaching, the organization will receive hundreds of hours of effective work from others. A good leader doesn't measure their own productivity by how much they accomplish, but by how much they enable others to accomplish. Grove once said, training is like sharpening a knife. No one likes to stop midway to sharpen because they think they're losing time. But if you don't sharpen, the knife will soon be dull, and the work will become increasingly heavy. Training is how an organization prevents itself from becoming dull amidst its own success. In practice, effective coaching doesn't come from theory, but from subtle observation. The leader must recognize the moment when someone needs advice, or simply needs silence to figure things out themselves. Some mistakes should be corrected immediately, but there are also mistakes that people need to bump into themselves to truly understand their limits. Coaching isn't about talking a lot, but knowing when to speak. One of the hallmarks of a healthy organization is when every level of leadership becomes a teacher. Everyone who is coached, in turn, coaches others. When knowledge and skills spread in a chain, productivity becomes exponential. Conversely, when managers focus only on their own results, knowledge is hoarded, the system stops growing, and stagnation sets in. In coaching, leaders not only impart knowledge but also instill trust. Many people fail not due to a lack of ability, but because they lack someone who believes they can. A timely word of trust can save a career. A word of doubt uttered at the wrong time can extinguish all motivation. Good coaches don't just see people in the present, but also in their future potential. Grove believed that training is the only legacy a leader leaves behind after they depart. The product of leadership isn't plans but people. Everyone who has been guided correctly will carry that style, multiplying it through new generations of leaders. When a boss creates successors better than themselves, that organization has entered a true cycle of maturity. And looking back, I understand that coaching isn't a job, it's a mission. It not only helps others become better, but also keeps the leader humble, because teaching others means learning about yourself. Every question, every piece of feedback, every one of their failures reflects how you yourself once grew. When coaching becomes the natural rhythm of the organization, everyone is both a student and a teacher. Then, feedback is no longer a command, money is no longer the sole motivator, and leadership is no longer power. Everything becomes a living cycle where people help each other grow. And that is what drives the organization's continuous evolution, because ultimately, a leader's success isn't measured by what they achieve, but by how many others can continue when they are no longer there. And when that happens, the organization is no longer a collection of people, but a living entity that learns, grows, and sustains a winning spirit, even when the original coach is no longer in the game. In a world where everything demands quick results, Andrew Grove's high output management serves as a calm reminder. The true power of management lies not in speed, but in the ability to see people. The book isn't about grand strategies or distant corporate secrets. It's about the simplest thing: how one person inspires others to collectively create value beyond individual limits. From a small breakfast factory to a global technology corporation, Grove never claimed to be a great leader. He simply learned to ask the right questions, listen deeply enough, and dare to change when the truth demanded acknowledgement. Leadership, ultimately, is not power. It is responsibility. The responsibility to keep the system alive and learning. The biggest lesson of the book is that an organization is never smarter than the way it is managed. When the leader knows how to coach, give feedback, and trust, the organization becomes flexible and self-operating. But when the leader only knows how to command, control, and instill fear, productivity dies in silence. Management isn't about making others work, it's about making others want to work. The book forces us to look inward. Are we using power to control or to uplift? Are we hiding our insecurities with commands? Or do we dare to face the truth that leadership sometimes means silence and observation, allowing others to find their own right path? The irony is that Grove, who ran one of the world's largest technology corporations, believed the future of organizations didn't lie in technology, but in coaching people. AI can calculate, predict, and replace many functions, but it cannot do what a true leader can: ignite belief and instill in others the feeling that their efforts matter. And then we ask ourselves, on our own journey, what kind of leader are we becoming? One who makes others afraid to make mistakes, or one who encourages them to try again? One who only sees results, or one who sees untapped potential? Because how we treat others will determine the future of the collective we lead. Perhaps what has made this book endure for so long is that it doesn't speak of theory, but of the raw feeling of someone once drained by responsibility. Grove didn't deify management. He called it what it truly is: a difficult, sometimes lonely job, but also the only job that can transform chaos into creative order. And as we close the final page, we realize that the important thing isn't to be the best leader, but to be someone from whom others can learn something. A successful organization isn't where everyone is right, but where everyone is allowed to learn from their mistakes. If you are leading a team, a company, or simply your own life, try asking yourself, if I were to disappear today, would this system continue to operate well? If the answer is yes, it means you've coached correctly. If the answer is no, then that's not a failure but an invitation to begin to change. Because the ultimate purpose of leadership isn't to make others dependent on you, but to enable them to stand on their own 2 feet, even when you are no longer there. At that point, you are no longer a manager but a sower of seeds, and every seed, if nurtured correctly, knows how to find its own light.